you sit on a lot of boards. Something that I had discussed with Paul Stanzik of Parker Gale on the pod was how board meetings can easily become this performative theater, right? You're not actually acting like how you usually act. What separates a useful board meeting from a useless one in your view?
I think the mistake I see a lot of people make is reading us the news. What I really like to see, I think the most effective and the best uses of time are the situations where the team comes in and they basically say, hey, like, we've given you the materials with enough time in advance. We probably have monthly reporting calls where we have a reasonable cadence and you're pretty well informed on what's going on with the business. Based on that, if you have anything you want to talk about, great. But these are the three big topics that I want your input on, that I need perspective on, or the decisions that we need to make between the board and the management team about future direction. I think a focused list basically can't be more than three things. The board meetings that are the best are the ones where somebody comes in with, these are the three topics we need to discuss, and this is what I want to get out of it, whether that's decisions or it's just perspective.
That's super helpful. And I tend to agree. If you show up and you're doing this dissertation, I'll admit, I've been in a couple board meetings where we truly said before we went in, like, we're just trying to dribble out the clock on this one. Ideally, that should not be the case. You should be going into a couple of pointed things that you want feedback on. It's less so about what you did in the past and giving them the numbers. You can send that ahead of time. It's what would be useful to get direction on and just picking a couple.
That's where your board composition matters. I've spent 10 plus years at PSG, and before that, I worked for an investment bank. I've never been in an operator seat. I've learned a lot along the way. I like to think that I can ask good questions and kind of drill into the heart of the issue. But the reality is I've never actually sat in that seat. And so the approach that I always try to take is, okay, well, what's the perspective that I can bring to the board that the management team isn't going to inherently have or just naturally know based on their position and experience? That gets back to the conversation we were having around narrative, right? Like, how do we construct an equity story that's going to be compelling to the market? How is the buyer universe going to look at this business? What are the questions they're going to ask? What are the things that are going to make them really excited? And what are the things that are going to make them nervous? And then let's try to translate that into, okay, what's the conversation we should be having today based on our timeline? You know, we could be 5 years away from an exit. We could be 12 or 18 months. And those have different implications for what we're going to be able to accomplish realistically. Let's try to translate, how's our equity story going to play? What's the buyer universe going to be looking for into what we need to be doing today? That's a perspective where, like, yeah, I can't add the operator's perspective, and we like to bring in independent board members, senior advisors of ours, or folks from our operations team who can add that in more depth than I'm able to. But that's the perspective that I try to bring to the board, because that is something that I think is, it's not a knowledge gap, but it's an experience gap and it's a proximity gap, right? Like, I'm very close to the buyer universe relatively. I kind of know what's going on in the heads of private equity firms or strategic buyers that might be interested in these companies. That's kind of my job, is to help gather that market intel and then translate it back to, okay, well, what does it mean for what we should be doing strategically with this business?
You know, I was in a scenario once where we were debating, and this is something that you help companies with, adding payments to our product. And we'd researched it at length, but we also knew that in order to be really good at this, we were going to have to hire probably like 12 more heads, many of which would be specialized. And I knew my R&D in my forecast over the next 12 months, we talked about, is this near term or longer term? It was going to go up like at least 10% more percentage of revenue wise. And so one of the conversations we were having with the board was, look, we could do this, but you know how we should package this for some sort of exit event in the future. Is this better as a future idea for someone else to kind of scaffold in their head and say, this is where the extra value is? Or is it something that we should actually put money down on now, not see a return for minimally 18 months on it? If we're going to go to this dance, we need to know what the date is and what we should wear to it, because I don't want to go deep into the red to build this. We're also trying to have some sort of liquidity discussion.
To give you a very lawyerly answer, like, my answer to that would be, it depends. But I'd be looking at it going like, hey, how do I think this business is going to trade? Is it going to trade off of EBITDA? Is it going to trade off of revenue? What are the multiples associated with it? What's the sort of quantum of the investment? The crux of that question kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Like, if you're saying, I want to get paid on this as a product that exists in a growth lever, well, the way to build as much conviction as possible for the buyer universe around it is to show them as much as you can in data that this is actually working, right? Like, That's the way I'm going to build conviction is like, hey, this is an idea. It's something that's actually happening. It's something that's actually happening in the company today. It is successfully working. And I can look at the attach rates as an example, or I can look at the take rates. And then I can make a value judgment about, okay, well, how much am I willing to value that new strategy or that new growth lever? Again, depends on the timeline and how you're looking at it. That would be an argument for like, yeah, go for it. As long as you think the ROI is going to be quick enough that people are going to have something to diligence. The worst of all worlds is like, hey, we're going to depress EBITDA to invest in a payments product that's not going to have anything to show for it when we take it out to market. And oh, by the way, somebody's going to be paying an EBITDA multiple for this business. And so I basically have just knocked off 15 or 20 times whatever I invested in this, and I'm not going to get any incremental value for it. That's not a good situation. But if you were to say, I think this is going to be more ARR based than EBITDA based, and I think we can get to some relatively quick proof points that allow us to build a case analytically that can help get investors comfortable with this new growth lever, that's a great use of time and capital.
How do you read the tea leaves in the market to figure out if something's going to trade off of revenue versus EBITDA?
I mean, growth rate is a massive input into that, and I think retention is a massive input into that. If you're sub 90% gross dollar retention, including downsell, you're unlikely to see an ARR multiple. I'd say really strong growth and really strong gross dollar retention are two things that may allow you to trade on an ARR multiple as opposed to an EBITDA multiple. I do think that's a misconception sometimes that I run into when talking to founders or management teams, right? Like the basic principle behind everything that we do and the basic principle behind value for any business at the end of the day is cash flow. And so the only reason that people pay ARR multiples for businesses that don't generate any cash flow is because you believe that company is going to have really strong margins eventually when it stops making sense to invest as much as you are in the growth engine, that you're going to be able to generate really strong margins and cash flow. It's the only reason I would pay an ARR multiple for a business. It doesn't make any sense otherwise. And I definitely have had that like disconnect in the past where somebody's looking at something and they kind of act as if they think that ARR multiples exist just because that's what people do. It's like, well, no, we'll pay that because I think this business is going to be big because it's growing really fast. And because I think eventually, if and when I thought it made sense to make the capital allocation decision that I'd rather optimize for profitability than for growth, I can generate a lot of cash flow out of this thing.
People often forget that ARR or revenue multiples are meant to be a shorthand or a stand-in for profitability multiples, whether that be free cash flow, EBITDA, net income, whatever you want to call it. They were invented because companies were growing so fast and not profitable yet. It's not like an either or, it's a substitution.
I had a company today, small business, that said, hey, like we would need at least 10 times revenue in order to trade. They also were saying, hey, we have 75% EBITDA margins or something of the sort. And so like you look at that and you go, okay, well, like the delta between 10 times ARR or 10 times revenue and the multiple of EBITDA in that context is not very much.
No.
I think you're talking about 10 times revenue or 12 and a half times EBITDA.
That's a very profitable business, by the way.
And then you get into questions of, okay, pro forma profitability. I'm like, all right, practically, if I were to buy this business or make it an add-on to one of my existing companies, how much would I need to invest in it to actually run it properly? Are those the right, run rate, long-term margins? That's a different set of questions. It's a good illustration, right? Like the way that he positioned was, at least 10 times revenue. It's like, well, your revenue and your EBITDA multiples at that point are interchangeable because those numbers are so close, like it doesn't really make any difference.
If you like 10 times revenue, man, you're going to love 14 times EBITDA.
Exactly.
One more thing about SpendHound. Teams using SpendHound reduce software spend by up to 30%. Here's how that actually happens. First, you get the data. Real pricing benchmarks from over 1,000 companies across 10,000 SaaS and AI vendors. When a renewal comes up, you know what fair pricing is and what you should be pushing for. But knowing the number and getting the number are two different things. SpendHound also includes on-demand procurement specialists who help with negotiation strategy, contract review, and renewal emails. You stop overpaying for the tools you need. You cut redundant tools before they renew. And you negotiate from a position of strength now that you have both the market data and expert support behind you. SpendHound is built by the team behind Yipit Data. It's rated #1 on G2 in SaaS spend management. And did we mention it's free forever for SMB? When we say free, we actually mean it. You can keep all the savings. Plus, it's only $10,000 per year for enterprise with $150,000 in savings guaranteed. There's a reason we're growing more than 100% year over year. Do you want to stop overspending on SaaS? Then go to spendhound.com/CJ. Zero risk, guaranteed savings. That's spendhound.com/CJ.